Hey everyone! Today on Pro Tips, we're going to be talking about strings, different kinds of strings, and picks, their relationship with your instrument, with your hand, and how they work together to work for your sound and also against it. Let's get into it. Obviously, your guitar needs to have strings on it so it makes some sound. Otherwise, it's going to be a really nice piece of furniture that you have on display, right? The good news is we make absolutely fantastic strings and several different kinds of strings to choose from. We have different gauges of strings and we have different materials of strings as well. So I guess first let's talk about string gauge, right? And the impact that can have on your instrument. We'll just talk about the most common ones to start. We just call them lights and mediums. So for us, our light gauge, the high E string is a 12. Our medium gauge, the high E string is a 13. A little bit of different string tension. Light gauge, depending on your scale length, is going to put about 150 pounds of string tension on. Medium gauge is going to bump that up to about 170 pounds, give or take, right? So what that's going to do immediately is going to change how much your guitar projects. It can also change the clarity. It can change the bass response, those kinds of things. There's a balancing act, however, right? So if you put medium gauge strings on because you want it to be super, super loud, you want it to be super bass heavy, really a lot of clarity, you might find you don't have the hand strength to do that. So maybe light gauge would work better for you anyway. Just as a pre-nomer to put it out there, as with anything, with guitars, with strings, with picks, with anything, the best thing to do is experiment. There is no right or wrong answer with this. Again, that's why we make a whole lot of options for you to experiment with. Just to give you a couple illustrations of what we offer here, we have a couple different materials, right? So some of the more common material that there are in the industry are known as phosphor bronze, so it's like a 92-8 phosphor bronze. We also have 80-20. What those basically are, it's a mix of phosphor bronze to other materials. With the phosphor bronze, our 92-8 phosphor bronze, what you're going to get is a lot of clarity, a lot of punch, good sustained bass response, a clear bass response. We also have the 80-20, like I mentioned. Those are going to be a little bit brighter out of the box. Just because of the material they are made out of, they may mellow out sort of quickly. So again, as with anything, experiment. We also have some of our new Luxe strings with our Kovar material. These are definitely a really clear, natural sound. They have enhanced longevity. Just a great product. If you're into more of the classical sort of sound, we have these, which we call our Retro Series strings. These are made out of Monel. If you're not familiar with Monel, that was sort of the industry standard up through the 60s. And then sort of more or less overnight, the industry switched over to phosphor bronze and Monel kind of went by the wayside because of availability. A few years ago, we started making the Monel strings again for that retro sound. And this also comes standard on one of our models right out of the factory. But just to give an example of some of the things that we do offer and some of the differences that they make. So let's briefly talk about changing your strings. How often, why, what would lead you to change the strings? Why wouldn't you change strings? I understand a lot of you watching this are going to tell me that you've had the same strings on for 3 years and they sound great, and why would I ever change them if they didn't break? There's a lot of reasons, but just to touch on it here briefly, that extra material, the tarnish that builds up on strings over time, obviously now you're losing a lot of tonality from that. The extra mass on those strings could also affect your intonation. So if you find that your guitar's not playing in tune as well as it used to, it could be because they just have all that tarnish and stuff on them, and it's extra mass that's ruining your intonation. And the strings are going to break eventually. The last thing that you want to have happen is you're at a gig somewhere and then you're up in front of people and you got a string breaking, right? So keep them fresh, all of those things. Fresh strings also don't put as much wear and tear on your instrument. The extra mass on those strings, again, besides messing with your intonation, they're getting tighter. It's going to make your guitar pull more. It's putting more stress on the instrument than need be. One of the biggest reasons to change strings, that stuff aside, is just to experiment and see what different strings sound like on your instrument, right? Just because your D28 came from the factory with these strings doesn't necessarily mean that those strings are going to complement the voice and how you want that guitar to sound. One of the easiest ways to do that is just change the strings and see what it does for you. You can change the material, you can change the gauge, go through them, see what works. You might surprise yourself. So I mentioned in the intro of this video that we're going to be talking about strings and the impact on tone. The other part of this is guitar picks and their influence on the tone and how they work in conjunction with your strings or possibly against it, right? What I meant by that, there's a lot of different materials that picks are made from. There's also a lot of thicknesses that they are made from. Each one has a different sound. And can affect things differently. So say, you want to get a little bit of a brighter sound, so you're, choosing a specific kind of string to do that based on the description. But for some reason, you like the feel of a wooden pick. That is a thing. So you're playing a wooden pick, which is immediately going to dull the sound of those strings down. So maybe you're going to not get the sound out of that string that you necessarily envisioned. Right? So think of, this is going to be strange when I say it, I get it. So think of, you have the whole dish, right? With the guitar and the strings, and you have the recipe already made, right? So the pick is kind of the salt in there that's going to make the flavor pop. So let's do a little bit more of a deep dive on what I mean by how these picks can affect your tonality of your guitar. So what you see here, we have a couple different colors. The multicolored picks that we have are made of Delrin, and besides the sound that they produce, which I'll demonstrate here in a sec, they actually have different gauges on them. So some of them have a lighter attack because of how thin they are. Some of them have a heavier attack because of how heavy they are, depending on your strumming style. If you're a heavy strummer, you really get after it. You might not want to use a heavy pick. You also may not really want to use a super light pick. With the heavy pick, if you're a heavy strummer, you could break strings. You could start, you get a lot of buzzing because you're hitting the strings really too hard. If it's too light of a pick and you're a heavy strummer, then you could actually end up breaking the strings and you get sloppy attack besides. So might want to be somewhere in the middle. Again, as with everything, you need to experiment. Once you choose the gauge that works well for you, there are different options as far as material. So as I mentioned, these are Delrin. We have tortoise picks that are made of celluloid. We also have some new picks that we're making in-house, made of our own proprietary blend of polymers, which are pretty cool, super unique shape too. So I just want to do a quick demonstration though, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is a average size, medium size Delrin pick. So sonically, if I just drop it on the table, you hear what that sounds like. Now, if I compare that to, say, the celluloid pick, it sounds completely different, right? If I do the same thing with this polymer pick, you hear the glassiness of that. So all of that is going to be translated into the guitar, into the strings, for extra harmonics, extra overtones, extra resonance. You may or may not want those things. Again, it all depends on what your ear hears and what you like. Certain things may work better in a live situation than they do in a recording situation. Again, options are never a bad thing, and the good news is we have plenty of them. All right, guys, so as always, I implore you to get out to a dealer, get out, play these guitars, get out and play these products. There is a link below to our website where you can find a list of all of our dealers. You can come by the factory. Again, we have instruments and products there for you to try out. See the link below for all of that information. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe. Leave your comments below on your pick choices, your string choices, how they've affected you. Any tips from you would be great. Any questions would be awesome. Looking forward to seeing you again in the next one of our videos. Thanks again. See you soon.